Hey YouTube, we're going to go over some more RFID stuff here, and more specifically this new reader I just got in. This is a HID Iclass SE reader and this ESP key here. So first off, a little bit about Iclass. Iclass Legacy, which is what this card is. This is a dual technology card. It's got both low frequency procs and high frequency NFC in it. So, Legacy Iclass has been broken for a while. The keys have been publicly released, and if you want to read more about that, there's a paper called The Heart of Darkness that details how that was done. Basically, they pulled the keys out of the firmware of the older readers. They fixed that in newer readers, so you can't do that. And then they went to something called Iclass SE, and now they have something called Iclass SEOS, S-E-O-S, that have not been publicly broken yet. There are ways to still read them without the reader. So, a quick rundown on how this works. The reader decrypts the card's data using the standard Iclass key, the one that's been leaked, or the SE key that has not been leaked, and parses that data into what's called PAX data, Physical Access Control System. And that data usually comprises a facility code and a card number. Or there's other variations of it, but that's the most common. That data is sent over the wires via WeGand to the control board. And then the control board decides if that card has access or not. And if it does have access, it unlocks the door. In this case, you'll hear one of these relays click, and one of these two amber lights will light up. But an interesting thing, this card does not have access on this system. But if we look at the reader here, we get a green flash and the reader beeps. We did not hear a relay click. So what that tells us is that this reader is using the standard Iclass keys. It's not using what's called elite keys. Elite keys are custom keys for one specific company or for one specific building. So they're keys that are defined and made for that customer. So no one else should ever, in theory, have that same elite key. So that beep tells us that the card and the reader have authenticated, and the reader was able to send the data to the access control board. The access control board just said, hey, I don't recognize that card, I'm not opening up. Now, we'll take this card, this SE fob, this HID SE fob. You probably heard that click. There it went again as the door closed, as it locked back. If you had this hooked up in a real setting, you would have your door strike or your magnet wired through those relays. Now, here's an interesting thing. We'll move these guys out of the way. We're not going to need those right now. I don't want to get them too close to the other reader. We're going to take our flipper here, and we're going to go, if we see that, we're going to go to NFC, and we're going to go to Iclass. I'm going to put it on this clear card, and you can see it read it. Hopefully that's showing up all right. But you've got the card data there. You can go in and parse that data, and you get a facility code and a card number. We can also write that, or we can emulate that. And if we emulate it, the reader acknowledged it. It's just the controller did not. So we're going to set that one out of the way, and we're going to read this blue fob and see what happens. Now, it did not like that. You see SE enabled, and it did not give us any data. It gave us the card serial number, but that's not enough to duplicate it. So there is a device for the flipper called the Seader, S-E-A-D-E-R, that allows you to read these SE and SEOS cards. I don't have one. They always seem to be out of stock whenever I look. They're about 70 to 90 bucks, but it has a SAM on it, a secure access module that allows it to parse that data. And you can write it to another non-SE card, like a legacy card like this, or you could also write it to like a T5577 fob, a prox fob. That's called a downgrade attack, and we're going to cover that in another video. But right now, we're going to talk about what this ESPKey does. Now, what it does is it allows you to capture that weekend data. Because like I said earlier, the data between the reader and the board is not encrypted. This allows you to capture it. Usually it's a tiny little device you could hide behind the reader, you know, in the junction box behind the reader. And when you go to the web interface, because it is broadcasting Wi-Fi, you get this. And as we see on there, a whole list of cards. Now I'm going to show you on this flipper here. We're going to go back and read this guy. And you see 0B6A, if you can see that on there. And hopefully this shows up. But you can see that last one is 0B6A. So that got the data. And those other swipes, the 0A26 that you see on there, is in fact this blue fob. So since the data from the reader coming out of it is not encrypted, it's able to give us that data from an otherwise unreadable fob. And that's how you're able to do a downgrade attack. And there are ways to prevent that, but if you're using a Weekend-based system, it would be rather hard. Now, here's another little device. This is the Chameleon Tiny. And it allows you to store up to 8 different cards in it. NFC cards. It does not do low-frequency procs. And it acts as an emulator. So, I have a prox card, an Iclass card, loaded into slot 8. You see slot 8's lit up. And it's one that's authorized in the system. So, for instance, you can take the flipper and read a card like that clear one, and then write it either to another blank Iclass card, or you can write it to the Chameleon if you have a slot marked as an Iclass, set up for Iclass. So that's one way you can copy one. And like I said, we will get into a downgrade attack in another video. But this is the setup here. Now the other cool thing about the ESPKey is it doesn't not just work on Iclass readers. It works on low frequency prox readers, and I believe you could use it on fingerprint readers too, because the fingerprint readers are still just sending, you know, unencrypted data, and it allows you to see that data. And some of these allow you to replay it. This one, it's an experimental version that I guess doesn't allow you to replay it. There is a BLE key. I don't have one of those. They're always sold out. It uses Bluetooth instead of Wi-Fi. But this will also give you the data from card technologies that have not been broken, such as MyFair, Desfire, like EV1 and EV2, that are still considered secure. And I'm sure there's someone out there that has broken them, but if they have, they're keeping it on the DL. But they're still considered secure. But it would still allow you, because even then, from the reader to the board is unencrypted. Now there is a newer technology called OSDP, open source, I forget what it stands for, but it has a secure mode that is encrypted. And there is another DEF CON talk out there that talks about how in theory it can be broken. And I believe they have made a prototype device similar to the ESPKey that works on OSDP. So I haven't messed with that. I may get a board that supports OSDP in the future. This one does not. But there's my setup there. So I am going to be getting a dual frequency reader. I've got one coming. It looks very similar to this, and it supports high frequency, the 13.56 megahertz, as well as 125 kilohertz. This card does support both. So the reader will not only be able to read these fobs, but your old style clamshell fobs. And I'll show about downgrade attacks. So that's coming up. Thanks for watching.